The sun rose gently over the rolling hills of Judah, casting its golden light on the small, unassuming home of Obed Edom. The fields around his house stretched wide, dotted with olive trees swaying in the breeze. Obed Edom, a humble man and devout follower of the Lord, began his day as he always did, with a prayer of thanksgiving for the safety and provision his family enjoyed. Life in their quiet village was simple, far removed from the politics and grandeur of King David's court. Yet, this day would mark the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in Obed Edom's life. Far away, King David and the people of Israel were celebrating. After years of struggle and conquest, David had established Jerusalem as the city of the Lord and sought to bring the Ark of the Covenant to its rightful place. The Ark, a sacred chest containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments, symbolized God's presence and power among his people. The journey began with music and rejoicing. Musicians played harps, tambourines, and cymbals as the ark was carried on a cart drawn by oxen. The air was filled with the sounds of celebration and the aroma of offerings made to the Lord, but the joy was short-lived. As the ark traveled along the road, the oxen stumbled, causing the ark to sway precariously. A man named Uzzah, walking beside the cart, instinctively reached out his hand to steady it. The moment his hand touched the ark, he fell to the ground, lifeless. The procession came to a halt, and the joyous atmosphere was replaced with shock and fear. King David, horrified by what had happened, called for the ark to stop moving. "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" David said, his voice trembling. He realized the holiness of God was not to be taken lightly, and he feared bringing the ark any closer to Jerusalem. After a moment of silence, one of David's advisors spoke. "There is a home nearby, my king, the house of Obed Edom. Perhaps he can take the ark while we seek the Lord's guidance." Back in the quiet village, Obed Edom was tending to his fields when he noticed a commotion on the road. He shaded his eyes against the sun and saw a group of men approaching, carrying something large and covered in gold. His heart quickened as he recognized the Ark of the Covenant. Moments later, a royal messenger arrived at his gate. "Obed Edom," the man said, his tone urgent, "the Ark of the Lord must stay here for a time. Will you accept this responsibility?" Obed Edom's first instinct was fear. The stories of the ark's power were well known, and the recent tragedy surrounding Uzzah was fresh in his mind. But as he looked at the ark, he felt a deep sense of reverence and conviction. This was no ordinary chest. It was the dwelling place of the Lord's presence. "Yes," Obed Edom said, his voice steady, "I will take it." The men carefully carried the ark into Obed Edom's home, placing it in a corner of the main room. His wife and children gathered around, their expressions a mix of awe and uncertainty. "What does this mean, father?" his eldest son asked. Obed Edom placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It means we must honor the Lord with everything we have," he said. "The ark is not just a symbol. It is holy. And it is here, in our home." That night, as the family prepared for bed, a sense of peace settled over the house. Obed Edom knelt before the ark, his prayer simple but heartfelt. "Lord, we are unworthy to host your presence, yet you have chosen our home. Teach us to honor you. Let your presence guide us and protect us." As he rose, a faint glow seemed to emanate from the ark, a quiet reminder of the power and holiness it carried. Obed Edom didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing: his life and the life of his family would never be the same. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Obed Edom's home, casting a warm glow over the Ark of the Covenant. From the moment the ark had arrived, there was an unmistakable shift in the household. The atmosphere felt different, quieter, more peaceful, as if the presence of the Lord was watching over them. Obed Edom and his family carried on with their daily routines, but they approached their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. Each prayer before a meal, every kind word exchanged, and even the simple act of sweeping the floor near the ark felt like an offering to God. But it wasn't long before the blessings began to appear, undeniable and extraordinary. One day, as Obed Edom worked in the fields with his sons, he noticed something unusual. The olive trees, which had struggled to bear fruit in recent years, were now bursting with abundance. Their branches drooped under the weight of plump, ripe olives, and the vines nearby were heavy with grapes. His eldest son, Asa, paused his work and looked at his father. "Father, have you ever seen anything like this?" Obed Edom shook his head, a smile spreading across his face. "The Lord is blessing us," he said. "It is His hand that makes the earth yield its fruit." The family rejoiced, giving thanks for the bounty that would provide for them and their neighbors. Inside the home, Obed Edom's wife, Miriam, noticed blessings of a different kind. The health of the family seemed to flourish. Her youngest child, who had been frail and prone to illness, now ran through the house with energy and laughter. "The fever is gone," Miriam whispered one evening as she cradled the child. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the ark. "The Lord has healed him." Even the servants in the household began to feel the ripple effects of God's presence. Conflicts that once simmered among them seemed to dissolve, replaced by harmony and cooperation. The entire household felt unified, as if the ark's presence had brought not just blessings, but peace. Yet with the blessings came challenges. Word of the extraordinary events in Obed Edom's home began to spread. Neighbors, curious and awed, came to see the ark for themselves. Some approached with reverence, asking questions about the Lord and offering prayers of their own. Others, however, arrived with skepticism and envy. "Why should his family be blessed so greatly?" one man muttered to another as they stood near the gate. "What makes him so special?" Obed Edom heard these whispers but chose to respond with humility. "It is not about us," he said to the gathered crowd one evening. "The blessings come from the Lord's presence. We are simply caretakers, chosen to honor Him." Most nodded in agreement, but a few walked away, their hearts hardened by jealousy. One night, as the household prepared for rest, a distant rumble of thunder echoed across the hills. Obed Edom stood at the window, watching the sky darken. His thoughts turned to the responsibility that had been placed on him and his family. "What if we fail?" he whispered to Miriam, who stood beside him. She placed a hand on his arm. "The Lord chose us for this," she said. "If we honor Him, He will guide us." Her words gave him comfort, and together they knelt before the ark, seeking God's strength and wisdom. The challenges intensified when a group of travelers arrived at the door one afternoon. They claimed to be scholars, interested in the history of the ark, but their questions soon revealed their true intentions. "Surely such a powerful artifact belongs in a grand temple," one said, his eyes darting toward the ark. Another added, "How can a humble home like this be worthy of hosting the presence of God?" Obed Edom's expression remained calm, though his heart raced. "The Lord's presence does not depend on grandeur or wealth," he said. "He chooses whom He wills, and we are honored to serve Him." The men left, grumbling among themselves, but Obed Edom felt a renewed determination to protect the ark and honor God's trust in him. Despite these challenges, the blessings continued to pour out, touching not only Obed Edom's family, but the entire community. The poor were fed from the abundance of their harvest. The sick were cared for with compassion, and the name of the Lord was glorified. One evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Asa spoke up. "Father, do you think the king will take the ark back to Jerusalem?" Obed Edom looked at his son, his face thoughtful. "If that is the Lord's will, then yes," he said. "But until that day, we will serve him faithfully and care for the ark as long as it is here." His words carried a quiet resolve, a reminder to his family that their role was not about power or prestige, but about obedience and faithfulness. As the stars filled the sky that night, Obed Edom knelt once more before the ark, his heart full of gratitude and awe. The presence of the Lord had transformed his home, and though challenges remained, he trusted in God's provision. The morning air was crisp and clear, and the fields surrounding Obed Edom's home shimmered with dew. The days had been filled with blessings, abundant harvests, miraculous healings, and a peace that seemed to settle over the household. Yet, with these blessings came an undercurrent of tension. The news of the ark's presence in Obed Edom's home had traveled far, even reaching the ears of King David in Jerusalem. In the royal palace, David listened intently as his advisors shared the stories of the miraculous happenings at Obed Edom's estate. "The man and his household are thriving," one advisor said. "His fields yield more than ever, and his family is in perfect health." Another added, "It is clear that the Lord's favor rests on him because of the ark." David leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. The tragedy of Uzzah's death still weighed heavily on his heart, but he knew the ark belonged in Jerusalem, the city he had dedicated to the Lord. "It is time," David said finally, his voice firm. "We will bring the ark to Jerusalem, but this time we will do it the right way, with reverence and according to the Lord's commands." Meanwhile, at Obed Edom's home, life continued with its newfound rhythm. The family worked the fields, cared for the livestock, and tended to the ark with the utmost respect. Obed Edom often found himself reflecting on the transformation his household had experienced. One afternoon, as he stood in the shade of an olive tree, his eldest son Asa approached him. "Father," Asa began hesitantly, "do you think the ark will stay here forever?" Obed Edom smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "The ark belongs to the Lord," he said. "If he calls it to another place, we will honor his will. Until then, we will serve faithfully." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of trumpets. Obed Edom's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the road. A procession was approaching, chariots, soldiers, and the unmistakable banners of King David. The family and servants quickly gathered, their expressions a mix of awe and apprehension. When the king's chariot stopped at the gate, David dismounted and approached Obed Edom with a warm smile. "Obed Edom," David said, extending his hand, "the stories of your faithfulness have reached my ears. The Lord has clearly blessed you and your household." Obed Edom bowed deeply. "My king, it has been an honor to care for the ark. The blessings we have received are beyond measure." David's gaze shifted to the ark, visible through the open doorway of the home. His expression grew solemn. "The ark must return to Jerusalem," David said, his voice tinged with both excitement and reverence. "But I wanted to come myself to thank you for your stewardship. You have served the Lord well." Obed Edom's heart sank at the thought of parting with the ark, but he nodded in agreement. "The ark belongs to the Lord, and his will must be done," he said. David placed a hand on Obed Edom's shoulder. "You and your family are welcome in Jerusalem anytime," he said. "Your faith has inspired many, and your story will not be forgotten." Preparations began immediately. David's men carefully inspected the ark, ensuring it would be transported according to the Lord's instructions. Priests and Levites were assigned to carry it on poles, just as the law commanded. As the day of departure approached, Obed Edom and his family gathered for one final prayer before the ark. They knelt together, their hearts heavy but full of gratitude. "Lord," Obed Edom prayed, his voice steady despite the emotion in his chest, "thank you for choosing our home to host your presence. May your ark bring blessings wherever it goes, and may we always honor you in all we do." The morning of the ark's departure was both solemn and celebratory. David and his procession arrived with musicians and singers, their instruments filling the air with joyful melodies. The priests lifted the ark onto their shoulders, their movements deliberate and reverent. As the procession began its journey, Obed Edom and his family stood at the gate, watching until the ark disappeared over the horizon. That evening, as the household gathered for supper, the absence of the ark was deeply felt. The corner of the room where it had rested seemed emptier, quieter. But even in its absence, the family felt the presence of the Lord, as if the blessings the ark had brought would remain with them always. As they sat together, Asa broke the silence. "Do you think our lives will return to how they were before the ark came?" Obed Edom shook his head. "No," he said with certainty. "The ark has changed us. We have seen the Lord's power and felt his presence. We will never be the same." That night, as the stars filled the sky, Obed Edom stood in the fields looking toward Jerusalem. Though the ark was no longer in his home, he felt a deep peace. His time as the ark's caretaker had been a gift, and he trusted that the Lord's plans were greater than he could imagine. The sun rose over the hills of Judah as the Ark of the Covenant made its way toward Jerusalem. The procession was magnificent, with King David leading the way, clothed in a linen ephod, a symbol of humility before God. Musicians played lyres, cymbals, and harps, their melodies weaving through the crowd. The people danced and sang, their voices lifted in praise. As the ark moved closer to the city, the air buzzed with excitement. David's joy was contagious. He leapt and danced before the Lord with all his might. The scene was one of unbridled worship, a reminder to all of the holiness and power of God's presence. Meanwhile, back at Obed Edom's home, life felt quieter without the ark. The family went about their daily routines, but the absence of the ark was a constant reminder of how much their lives had changed during its stay. Obed Edom stood in the garden one afternoon, looking at the empty space where the ark had rested. His wife Miriam approached him, her hands dusted with flour from baking bread. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said, her voice gentle. He nodded. "The ark brought such a tangible sense of God's presence," he said. "But even now, I feel as though he is still with us." Miriam smiled. "Perhaps the ark was here to teach us that his presence is not confined to one place. He's with us wherever we go." In the days that followed, the family began to focus on spreading the blessings they had experienced. Obed Edom invited neighbors to their home, sharing the story of how God's presence had transformed their lives. "God doesn't choose based on wealth or status," Obed Edom told a group gathered around a fire one evening. "He chooses those who are willing to honor him. If we live faithfully, his blessings will follow." The young children of the village sat wide-eyed, listening to his words. One boy, no older than 10, raised his hand. "Do you think the ark will bless Jerusalem like it blessed your home?" he asked. Obed Edom smiled. "I believe it will bless anyone who honors it with the same reverence and love," he said. In Jerusalem, the arrival of the ark was met with great celebration. The people lined the streets, throwing flowers and singing praises as the ark was carried to its resting place in the tent David had prepared. David himself offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. Once the ceremonies were complete, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty and distributed food to everyone, loaves of bread, cakes of dates, and cakes of raisins. Among the crowd were many who had heard of the blessings at Obed Edom's house. They whispered to one another, sharing stories of abundant harvests and miraculous healings. The faith of the people was renewed, and their hearts were stirred to worship. Back in his fields, Obed Edom felt a tug at his heart as he worked alongside his sons. Though he was content to stay in his village, he couldn't shake the feeling that his role in God's plan wasn't over. One evening, as he knelt in prayer, he felt a deep peace settle over him. It was as if God was reminding him that the lessons he had learned during the ark's stay were meant to be shared. "We've been blessed to be a blessing," he told Miriam that night. "Perhaps there's more we can do to honor the Lord." In the weeks that followed, Obed Edom and his family traveled to Jerusalem, eager to see the ark in its new home. When they arrived, they were struck by the sight of the city filled with worshipers, their faces alight with joy. Obed Edom approached the tent where the ark rested, his heart swelling with gratitude. Though it was no longer in his home, the ark's presence felt as powerful as ever. King David, recognizing Obed Edom in the crowd, greeted him warmly. "Your faithfulness has been an example to us all," David said. "The blessings you received have inspired many to honor the Lord." Obed Edom bowed humbly. "It was an honor, my king," he said. "The Lord's presence has changed our lives forever." As the family returned home, they carried with them a renewed sense of purpose. They continued to share their story, spreading the message of God's faithfulness and the power of His presence. Though the ark now rested in Jerusalem, the lessons it had taught Obed Edom and his family remained etched in their hearts, a reminder that God's blessings are not confined to a single place but are available to all who seek Him. The days after Obed Edom's visit to Jerusalem were filled with reflection and a renewed sense of purpose. Though the Ark of the Covenant was no longer in his home, its impact on his family and community was undeniable. The peace and blessings that had filled his household now extended outward, inspiring those around him to seek the Lord. Obed Edom's story became well known in the surrounding villages. Farmers came to him for advice, not just about crops, but about faith. Families sought his wisdom, hoping to understand how to invite God's blessings into their own homes. His fields, once the site of quiet labor, now bustled with visitors eager to learn from the man whose life had been transformed. One afternoon, as Obed Edom walked through his olive grove, a group of young men approached him. They were shepherds from a nearby village, their clothes dusty from travel. "Obed Edom," one of them said, bowing slightly, "we've heard of how the ark of the Lord blessed your home. We want to know, how did you honor it? How did you gain God's favor?" Obed Edom paused, leaning on his staff as he considered their question. "God's favor is not something we earn," he said gently. "It is a gift. But honoring Him requires humility and obedience. When the ark came to my home, we treated it with reverence, not as a trophy, but as a symbol of God's presence. We prayed, gave thanks, and lived each day in service to Him." The young men nodded, their expressions thoughtful. "What if we don't have an ark in our homes?" one asked. Obed Edom smiled. The ark was a reminder of God's covenant, but His presence is not limited to a single object or place. Seek Him with all your heart. Honor Him in your words, your actions, and your thoughts. That is where you will find his blessings. Back in Jerusalem, the ark's presence had transformed the city. Worshippers gathered daily at the tent David had prepared, offering prayers and sacrifices. The king himself led the people in songs of praise, his joy infectious. But the memory of Obed Edom's faithfulness lingered in David's mind. He often spoke of the Gittite's unwavering devotion, using it as an example for others to follow. Obed Edom's home was blessed because he welcomed the Lord with humility and obedience, David told the priests one evening. Let us honor the ark in the same way that God's favor may remain with us. Meanwhile, at Obed Edom's home, his family continued to flourish. His children, inspired by the experiences they had shared, began to take on leadership roles in the community. Asa, his eldest son, became known for his wisdom and fairness, often mediating disputes among neighbors. His younger children, too, showed a heart for service, helping the poor and caring for the sick. Miriam, ever the quiet strength of the household, organized gatherings where women from the village could come to pray and share their burdens. These gatherings became a source of encouragement for many, fostering a sense of unity and hope. One day, as Obed Edom stood at the edge of his field, he saw a familiar figure approaching. It was one of King David's messengers, riding swiftly on horseback. The man dismounted and bowed respectfully. "Obed Edom," the messenger said, "the king requests your presence in Jerusalem. He wishes to honor you for your faithfulness and to seek your counsel." Obed Edom's heart swelled with gratitude. Though he had never sought recognition, he was humbled by the king's invitation. When he arrived in Jerusalem, Obed Edom was struck by the sight of the city bustling with worship. The tent where the ark rested was surrounded by people singing praises and offering sacrifices. It was a reminder of the power and holiness of God's presence. King David greeted him warmly, clasping his hand. "Obed Edom," he said, "your faith has been a light to us all. Your story has reminded us of the importance of honoring the Lord in all we do." Obed Edom bowed. "My king, it has been my family's greatest honor to serve the Lord. The blessings we have received are a testament to his faithfulness, not ours." David smiled. "Nevertheless, your example has inspired many, including myself. Will you share your story with the people, that they may learn from your faith?" That evening, Obed Edom stood before a gathering of worshippers near the ark. His voice was steady as he recounted the journey of hosting the ark, the blessings it brought, and the lessons his family had learned. "God's presence is not confined to a single place," he said. "It is with those who seek him, who honor him with their lives. The ark reminded us of his holiness, but his blessings extend far beyond it. Serve him with humility, and you will find his favor." The crowd listened intently, their hearts stirred by his words. As Obed Edom returned to his home, he felt a deep sense of peace. The ark had left his household, but its impact remained, shaping the lives of all who had been touched by its presence. The sun was setting over the hills of Judah, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Obed Edom stood in his olive grove, gazing out at the land that had flourished under God's blessings. Though the Ark of the Covenant was no longer in his home, its impact had rippled far and wide, leaving a legacy that would last for generations. In the months following the Ark's departure, the changes in Obed Edom's family and community became undeniable. The peace that had settled over his household seemed to linger, shaping their daily lives. His children carried themselves with a quiet confidence, their hearts devoted to serving the Lord. One evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Asa, Obed Edom's eldest son, spoke up. "Father," he said, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. The ark may be gone, but the lessons it taught us remain. Shouldn't we share those lessons with others? Obed Edom smiled, his face illuminated by the firelight. You're right, Asa, he said. God's blessings are not meant to be kept to ourselves. They are meant to be shared, so that others may see his goodness and be drawn to him. And so, the family began to expand their efforts. Obed Edom and his children traveled to nearby villages, sharing their story and encouraging others to honor the Lord. They spoke of the power of humility and obedience, the importance of living in reverence to God's holiness, and the peace that comes from trusting in his plan. The young children of the villages listened wide-eyed as Asa described the glow of the ark at night, the way their fields had flourished, and the unity that had filled their home. Mothers wept as Miriam recounted the healing of her youngest child, a miracle that had strengthened her faith. Obed Edom himself often concluded their gatherings with a simple but powerful message. The presence of the Lord is not confined to the ark. It is with all who seek him, who walk in his ways, and who honor him with their lives. You don't need gold or a temple to find him. He is here in your heart, waiting for you to turn to him. Back in Jerusalem, King David often reflected on Obed Edom's faithfulness. The ark now rested securely in its tent, surrounded by worship and reverence. Yet, David knew that the story of the humble Gittite and his family was as much a part of the ark's journey as its arrival in the holy city. One day, David summoned Obed Edom to the palace once more. Obed Edom, David said, your story has inspired many, including myself. Would you consider serving in Jerusalem, assisting with the worship and care of the ark? Your faith and devotion are needed here. Obed Edom's heart swelled with gratitude. Though he loved his home, the opportunity to serve the Lord in Jerusalem was an honor he could not refuse. When Obed Edom shared the news with his family, they embraced the opportunity with excitement and reverence. Together, they packed their belongings and prepared to move to the city. In Jerusalem, Obed Edom's family found a new purpose. They worked alongside the priests and Levites, caring for the ark and participating in worship. Obed Edom's humility and wisdom quickly earned him respect, and his story continued to inspire those who came to worship. Years later, as Obed Edom sat with his grandchildren in the courtyard of their home in Jerusalem, he shared the story once more. The ark taught us more than I ever imagined, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. It reminded us that God's presence is not limited to a place or an object. It is with us always, guiding us, blessing us, and calling us to live in his ways. One of his grandchildren, a young boy with bright eyes, asked, "Do you miss having the ark in your home, grandfather?" Obed Edom smiled. The ark was a gift, but the greatest blessing was learning that God is with us no matter where we are. As long as we honor him, we carry his presence with us. The legacy of Obed Edom and his family lived on, their story a testament to the power of faith and obedience. From their humble home in Judah to the city of Jerusalem, their journey had shown that God's blessings are not reserved for the mighty or the wealthy. They are for all who seek him with open hearts. As the stars filled the night sky, Obed Edom looked up, his heart full of gratitude. The presence of the Lord had changed his life, and he knew that it would continue to transform the lives of all who turned to him.